B'minyan ha-mitzvah shebereish Sefer Hayad, al derech zeh b'Sefer ha-mitzvah shaloi, in the enumeration of the commandments of the mitzvahs at the very beginning of the Rambam's magnus opus, the Sefer Yad HaChazaka or Mishnah Torah, and it's the same in his delineation of all the mitzvahs in the book called Sefer HaMitzvahs, Kasav HaRambam Ki Mitzvahs Aseh HaAcharena. So in his listing, the Rambam lists the last positive commandment as Ladun B'dinei Nachalais, to adjudicate regarding inheritance. Shenemar, as it says in the Torah, Ish ki yamus uven ein loi. When a man dies, and in this situation where he has no son. And the context is the Bnei Salafchad, the daughters of Salafchad. We learned a Sikha about the Mekoshesh Eitzim, the one who on Shabbos cut down trees. And according to certain opinions, this was Salafchad, the father of these daughters, but in any case, he had no son. And the daughters, in a very, very smart way, went to bat for inheritance in the land of Israel. And in the context, the Torah talks about the laws of inheritance. And the Rambam cites these words, Ish kiyamus uven ein loi. If and when a man dies and he has no daughter, what should be the law regarding the inheritance in the land of Israel? Now the Rebbe says, Yodua, it's well known, Shahaseder b'divrei HaRambam meduyek b'tachlis, that everything in the Rambam's works is very, very specific. It's very, very orderly. Valpizem, move on. And so based on that, it's understood, Shemashadia Karambam l'sayim es minin ha-mitzvahs hasei b'mitzvahs nachalas. So then we can infer that if the Rambam chose to conclude his enumeration of the positive mitzvahs in the Torah with the mitzvah of nachales, with the mitzvah of inheritance, hu mishum shemitzvah zu hi hagmar v'hashlema shel inyan ha-mitzvahs. It's not by happenstance, and it's not because, okay, what do you expect? Some mitzvah has to be the last one, but rather that this mitzvah, the content of this mitzvah, represents the conclusion and the completion of the whole idea of mitzvahs in the most general way. Ukashem shemuvam bepashtos hatam shamitzvah rishoni b'mina mitzvahs hi leida sheyesh sham elokah shenamar anochi Hashem elokecha. And it's really, the Rebbe says, as simple to as we understand why the Rambam would choose for as the first mitzvah to know that there is a God. Lefi shehi ha-mitzvah rishona va'ikris mikol ha-mitzvahs habayis la'achrei zeh, because this is the main mitzvah, and is the forerunner of all the mitzvahs that will follow. If there's a God, then we could talk about commandments from God. Ubeloshen HaRambam Bereish Sefer Hayad, and in the terminology of the Rambam himself, at the very beginning, he says Yesoid HaYesoides VaAmud HaChachmas Leida Chulu, that this is the basis of all bases and the pillar of all knowledge, to know that there is a God. Ukedir Karambam Belshoina Bereish Mina Mitzvahs Mitzvah Rishona Chulei, and as the Rambam says specifically, when he lists his mitzvahs at the very beginning, he says that is the first mitzvah, the mitzvah to know that there is a God. Al derech zeh muvan b'negei lemitzvah acharena. So just like the first mitzvah is extremely specific, it's the same with the last mitzvah, ladun b'dinei nachalais, to adjudicate regarding inheritance. Shekviyasa k'mitzvah acharena de mitzvahs hasei hi b'diuk, lefi shehi hasiyum v'agmar shel kol ha-mitzvahs, that this is the last mitzvah, that the Rambam positioning it as the last mitzvah of the positive commandments is very, very specific, and he places it there because this is the conclusion of all the mitzvahs. Hindi, you wanted to say something?
Yes, isn't I wrote it in the
I guess
comments.
Cindy's gonna wait. I see in the chat somebody asks, isn't writing a Sefer Torah the last mitzvah? Mashi correctly said that we're not talking about the order of mitzvahs as they appear in the Torah, but the order in the Rambam's Yad HaChazaka. Seif Beis. Bashkafa Rishona, Haya Efshar Levar Tam Lekach. At first glance, it might be possible to explain why this is positioned as the last mitzvah. Why? The pashto, simply speaking, me'achar shekim kol hamitzvah shebetorah b'mei chayev shel ha'adam, ma she'ekim mitzvahs nachal shayeches el hazman shel basar chayev, leficha kava harambam mikoyma b'siyum ugmar hamitzvahs. At first glance, we might say that because all the rest of the mitzvahs have to do with what a Jew has an obligation to do while he's alive, this mitzvah has to do with after his life, right? Inheritance. It's about when he is no longer alive. So therefore, its place belongs at the end of all the mitzvahs. But right away the Rebbe says, but this is a very big stretch. Because if you look at the list, you'll see that way above this position of the last mitzvah, the Rambam deals with a bunch of mitzvahs that have to do with death and with things that have to be done after death. This is not the only thing that has to do with afterlife, and therefore we have to keep looking for a reason as to why this is positioned specifically as the last mitzvah. And in addition, inyan dine nachalais ain't a mitzvah hamutelas ala adam atzmai. The whole idea of inheritance is actually not a mitzvah that is incumbent upon the person. Ella hu mitzvah hamutelas al beisdin ladun bedine nachalais, but rather it is an obligation that is incumbent upon the Jewish court, the beisdin, and they have to adjudicate the concepts having to do with inheritance. And like the Rambam explains in this section concerning inheritance in his Sefer Yad Chazaka Gufa, Vahainu, and meaning Sha'al based in Ladun Avor Hayorshim Hachayim Keitzad Yeh Seder Yerushas Hanachalais. The Rambam explains that it's incumbent upon the court, the based in, to thrash this out and to adjudicate on behalf of the heirs who are living as to exactly what they would be inheriting. And this whole process of adjudicating is not really about the person whose assets are being inherited or his land. It's about his heirs. So once we understand that this is a mitzvah that's incumbent upon the Beis Din, and it's not incumbent upon an individual person, so now we've effectively completely knocked out the possibility of attributing where this mitzvah is placed as the last one to the fact that it's about after death, because it really is not about the person themselves, but about the Beis Din. And we also have to understand ala mitzvah hanal ladun bedine nachles hevi harambam kanal as a pasuk shenemar ish ki yamos uven eloi ulachayra betevas elulei nimtzatech mitzvah. Okay, so we have one question, which is why the Rambam places this as the last of all the mitzvahs. The second question is, the Rambam seems to be bringing down a pasuk, as he does, as is his style, which is the kind of the embodiment of this mitzvah. Okay, the citation is supposed to serve as the basis of this mitzvah. But the Rebbe says, when you look at the pasuk, as it says, when a man dies and he has no son. Now, seemingly, in these words, we don't have the content of the mitzvah. Why would the Rambam use this citation specifically? And the Rebbe does say, Lefikama nuschais, that there are different versions of the Rambam's Yad HaChazaka, the Mishnah Torah, and there are a couple of versions in which Achein Het Tika Rambam Teves Nesafes Mina Pasuk, that indeed the Rambam does cite additional words from the pasuk. For instance, the word V'havartem es nachalasa, you shall transfer his inheritance, etc. Ulekama nuschoyim devar gam bepasuk v'hesa l'chayk mishpat, and in other versions, the Rambam also cites the conclusion of this discussion in the Torah, which is, it shall be to you a law of judgment. V'tevos elu mabios es tochen hamitzvah shel nachales. And these additional words, or these additional fragments of psukim, do indeed express the content of the mitzvah a little bit more. But since in the most promulgated versions of the Rambam, in the ones that most people have, Huvu rak hatevas ish kiyomus uven ein loi, we have only the words, and when a man shall die and he has no son, sarech loimar shebehen levadan mizbar teichen mitzvahs ladun b'dinin nachales, that in these words alone is explained the content of this mitzvah. And of course, we have to understand how in these words is expressed the content of the mitzvah of inheritance. B'pashtus yesh leimar, in the brackets, the Rebbe says, simply we might say, shebahavaz hatevas harishoni shebepashas nachales, kavanas harambam hi l'chol hemshech hadvarim shebeparsha, kamay shematzinu al derech zeh b'sefer Rambam ba'in mitzvahs. Simply we might say, stop, over analyzing this. With the Rambam bringing those opening words of the section in the Torah that deals with these mitzvahs, he's alluding to the whole discussion in the Torah about the mitzvah of inheritance. And he does this stylistically, he does this for other mitzvahs. But the Rebbe pushes back and he says, no, everything in Torah, everything in the Rambam is punctilious. It is specific in the extreme. Ubifrat shaharambam loy haisif kan v'goymer, and especially because the Rambam does not bring down these words and then say etc. The Rames al hemshech haparsha. In that way, he would have been alluding to the rest of the discussion about this, but he didn't, and therefore, mistaber leimar, it's plausible to say shetevos elu atzman mivatos inyan ikri bedinin nachales, that these words by themselves express something absolutely central and axiomatic about the laws surrounding inheritance. Gimel. V'yesh loimar, or we might say, Shemashasiyim harambam es minin hamitzvos b'mitzvah ladun bedinin nachales, that the fact that the Rambam chose to conclude his enumeration of the positive mitzvahs with this mitzvah, hu al derech shematzinu shasiyim shashisha sidri hamishna hu b'maimer aseh kadosh baruch hu lahanchil l'chol tzadik v'tzadik chulei shenemar lahanchil oyav yesh. The Rebbe says, maybe we can say that the reason why the Rambam chooses this to be the last mitzvah is to align his writings with the Mishnayos. And we know that the last Mishnah in Mishnayos is that in the future, Hashem will bequeath to every tzaddik, and then the Rambam brings down a pasuk from Mishlei, Lahanchil Ohev Yesh, to give to those who love me an inheritance of substance. Ukabir hamefarshim b'tam mashasim hamishnayis hu dafke b'maimer zeh. And the mefarshim say, why does the Mishnayos end dafka with this teaching, with this Mishnah? Shezehu lefi sheteichne hu tashlum schar ha'avodah d'Torah mitzvah balachara. Because the content of this teaching is about the fulfillment of the reward that you get for your service of Torah and mitzvahs. It comes after finishing and bringing to fruition the learning of the Torah and the keeping of mitzvahs that you do in this life. V'diku b'mishnah loymar. And they point to the specificity of the Mishnah that says, Asid HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahanchil, that in the future God will bequeath an inheritance. Kevon shahagmul habag bigmar havodah Torah mitzvos hu lahanchil, because the reward or the payment that comes after one concludes their avodah of Torah mitzvahs is an inheritance that will come at the end of time. So therefore, it's referred to specifically with this terminology of lahanchil, nachala, something that you get after a time. And we might say, shal derech zeh hu b'nidin didan, b'divrei Rambam, that for the same reason, the Rambam concludes his listing and expounding on the mitzvahs with this mitzvah. Hatam shesiyim es aminim b'mitzvahs nachal eshu, lefi shesiyum v'shleimus kol mitzvahs haTorah kosher le'inyan nachala. Because with this, the Rambam is teaching that the conclusion of all the mitzvahs and the completion of Torah learning and mitzvahs has to do with the inyan of nachala, of something that you get, that you inherit later. In Daled, the Rebbe begins his explanation, which is just unbelievably beautiful, but he does so by first deepening the whole discussion and bringing a parallel from paralleling three different types of acquisition to three different relationships that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Parshas Nachala is nichtava b'Torah kehemshech le'inyan hayirusha v'chaluka shel Eretz Yisrael. This discussion regarding inheritance is written in the Torah as a continuation of the larger concept of inheritance and the allotment of the plots in Eretz Yisrael, and it is in connection with this larger subject that the daughters of Tzlafchad came and they claimed to know lanu achuza b'teich achei avinu, give us an ancestral plot of land amongst the brothers of our father. Va'al kach ba haparsha ish kiyamus. And so in answer to their very well crafted and argued claim comes the pasuk, comes the information about what will happen if a man dies and he doesn't have a son. V'hine, ve'inyan chalukas ha'aretz matzinu. In the concept of the allotment of the land in Eretz Yisrael, we find shebenaisav le'inyan hakloli shel Yerushas ha'aretz hayu beprati shloisha inyanim, that under the umbrella of the general idea of inheritance in the land of Israel, there really are three aspects that we have to pay attention to. So again, I should have had a chart. Alas, I don't know how to make those, but you'll see the various cells. So before we get into three different types of acquisition and three different modalities of connection between Klal Yisrael and the Eibishter, we have these three aspects of this concept that we're studying. There's Aleph, the Yerusha Sa'aretz. There's the idea that the Jews would inherit the land of Israel. Then Beis, there's Hachaluka Ba'ifin Shel Ravtar Ben Nachalasei Ulema'at Tamid Nachalasei. Then there's the aspect that the larger Shvatim, the ones that were more populous, would get a larger lot of land, and the ones that were smaller would get a smaller piece of land. And then Gimel, the third, there's the element of Ach B'Gorel Yichalik Es Haaretz, as to which part of the land, not the size of the land, but the geographic location of the allotment, that was by lottery, that was by Gorel. Kiloimar, this is to say, that there are three aspects to how this took place, or there are three aspects to the connection that the Jews have with Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so this is the second column in this imaginary chart. Aleph, there's Yerusha, there's inheritance. They get it because they inherit it. Then there's Chaluka al Pitam v'Seichel. Then there's the logical aspect of how it was divided. L'Rav Tarbe, to the larger Shevet would get more, the smaller Shevet would get less. And then there's Chaluka al Pikarel. And then there's the element of the lottery, which, as we know, in Hasidus is a very, very big inyan, and it always points to transcendence, right? It transcends reason and logic. And we might say that the reason for why it was necessary for these three components or these three facets to be present is Kabbalah's Bnei Yisrael is Eretz Yisrael kenachala loy haisa chalukas dam shel chevel eretz u'mesiras levnei Yisrael. Because the Jews receiving Eretz Yisrael as an inheritance is not just a pedestrian distribution or allocation of plots of lands. No, that's not what it is. Eretz Yisrael halohi nachalas Hashem, tamid eine Hashem lekecha ba mireshis Hashana vad achris Hashana. Eretz Yisrael is the inheritance of Hashem. It's the ancestral land of Hashem, about which the Torah says that the eyes of Hashem, your God, are always upon her from the beginning of the year until the end of the year, in unremitting fashion. And because this is the land of Hashem, therefore it was given to Bnei Yisrael. And this is because Bnei Yisrael are the inheritance of Hashem. Kishurim el HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we are connected to Hashem, or Kamaimer Chazal, and like the Chazal teach us, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said, Yavoyu Yisrael, Shabo Lechelki, let the Jews who came into my lot come, V'yinchalu es ha'aretz shabo Lechelki, and they will inherit the land that came into my lot. And therefore, Nesinas Eretz Yisrael Nachlas Hashem Levnei Yisrael Harehi Megala Umevia Lidei Bitoy Es Hakesher Shel Bnei Yisrael Makadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore, this is not just land acquisition. This is not just assets that are being transferred. There's something much, much more profound happening here. The giving of the land of Israel to Bnei Yisrael reveals and expresses the deep bond of Bnei Yisrael with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, and therefore, as we find that the bond of Bnei Yisrael with Hashem is comprised of three facets, as we say every morning in davening, Ashreinu matayv chelkeinu, how fortunate are we with our lot, with our portion, umanoyim garaleinu, and how pleasant is our lot, umayafa yerushaseinu, and how beautiful is our inheritance. And al derech zeh nesinas eretz Yisrael v'nei Yisrael hi b'shleisha oifanim. Okay, so let's review. We have three aspects in the giving of the land itself. Then we have three. Hold on a second. Let me step back and see if I can review it. Okay, so we have the fact that it's a Yerusha. We have the fact that it's divided al pitam vadas, and we have the fact that there's a girl. And this mirrors the fact that Bnei Yisrael are bonded to Hashem through three different expressions that we're going to look at in great detail. And then we're going to connect it to three modalities of acquisition. So the three ways that we express our bond is Chelkenu, Goyrelenu, and Yerushasenu. The Kevon Shebeseder Shleishas Inyanim Elu Chelek Goyrel v'Yerusha Achrein Hu Umayafa Yerushasenu Ilui Achar Ilui. And because in this order of how we look at these three facets, Chelek, Goyrel, and Yerusha, Chelek is our portion, Goyrel is our allotment, and Yerusha is our inheritance. And the last is how beautiful is our inheritance. And these are given to us in ascending order. So Muvan is understood. Yerusha yesh ba inyan umayla amukim yoser masher b'shnei inyanim hakodmim. So we understand from this that inheritance has much deeper qualitative aspects about it from the other two relationships, which is our portion and our lot. Vitzarich bir, and we have to understand. Aleph, mahu bir teichnam shel chelek Goyrel v'Yerusha kaifanim bekesher bein bnei Yisrael lekutcha brichu, umahu achiluk beinehem. So the first thing we have to understand is what is the content of these three modalities of connection between the Jews and Hashem, and what is the distinction between this? Okay, so this is not just simply an alliteration. It's not just, a literary device. These are three facets, and we have to understand them. And Beis, Ech yitachen klal geder hayirusha b'lashon pasuk ish kiyamos b'shaychus l'kesher shebein Yisrael l'kutcha brichu. And then we also have to understand, how is there even this idea of Yerusha? Yerusha means, like the pasuk says, the father died. But obviously, that has no connection to our relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, so we have to understand the difference between Chelek, Goyrel, and Yerusha. And then we have to understand, how does this idea of Yerusha even relate in our relationship to Hashem? Hey. And now we're getting into our next cells on the imaginary chart. And the Rebbe is going to introduce us to two additional modalities of acquisition in addition to inheritance. V'yesh leimar, sha'achiluk bein chelkenu legoyrelenu hu bedugmas hachiluk bein mecher lematana. The Rebbe says we might say that the difference between chelkenu, our portion, and goyrelenu, our lot, is like the difference between mecher, something that you acquire through a sale, lematana, something that you acquire through a gift. Okay, so now we have acquisition through sale, gift, or inheritance. Mecher, a sale, talui b'kasbei v'tashlumei shel halakeach. A sale always depends on the money and the payment from the one who bought whatever it is that's being sold. Hamishalem avor hadavar hanivkar. The person pays for whatever it is that's on the market, that's being sold. That's a sale. V'ilu matana. What about a gift? Ba mitzad ritzaynai hatoiv shel noisein hamatana l'loy tashlo mitzad hamakabel. But a gift is not initiated by the one who acquires it, but rather by the one who is giving it. It comes because of their good graces, because they have a desire to give this gift, and it has nothing to do with what the person who gets it pays for it. And the same thing is true regarding the effluence that comes from Hashem to Bnei Yisrael. Shekayamim behen shnei eifanim elu. There are two different ways in which things come to us from Hashem. There's schar hamitzvos v'chulei, hamshacha habal yidei avodas ha'adam, You could call this in Hasidic terminology isarusa dilatata. Okay, so there's the reward that a person gets for the mitzvahs. So this a person is precipitating through their work, through their service. So this is an overture from below. And then there's hamshacha betuvei bechein chulei isarusa dilatela mitzad atzmai. And then there's what Hashem gives us from His good grace. And this we call a sarusa de la'ela, an overture from above. It comes from Hashem Himself. Ubechlalus, and generally speaking, zeh hachiluk bein chelkeinu l'garelenu. This is the difference between our portion and our lot. Chelkeinu hu hakesher shel Yisrael l'kutshabrichu hanifal al yidei avodas Yisrael bedugmas mecher. Chelkeinu, our portion, is the connection between the Jew and Hashem that is created through the work that the Jew does. So it's like buying something. V'ilu garalenu, but our lot, hu hahiskashu shel Yisrael l'kutshabrichu mitzad zeh shebachar banu mikol ha'amim. This is a connection between Bnei Yisrael and Hashem that comes through the fact that Hashem chose us from all the other nations. Ki amitas inin habechira, bechira chavshis, and this is something that the Rebbe explains in numerous sichos, that bechira, choice, free choice, in its truest sense, in its most pristine sense, hi kasher habechira bedavar hanivcha einay mitzat tam b'cheshbon. It's when you choose something and there is no logical reason that you choose it. Okay, so in other words, if you choose something because it fits you and the color is on your palette and it's on sale, etc., etc., so that's not bechira chavshis. If you choose something for no reason at all, you just overcome with a longing for that thing. So that's a little bit closer to bechira chavshis, but we could argue that people don't have bechira chavshis at all. In fact, that's what the Rebbe always explains, right? Because we are wired a certain way. There's nature, there's nurture. We're going to be pulled towards certain things, even when we don't realize it. Okay, so bechira, and that's why ultimately, because it explains that only the Eibishter has bechira chavshis, because only the Eibishter is not impacted by any outside factors. So what's bechira chavshis? Hi kasher bechira bedavar hanivchar eina mitzat tam v'cheshbon biglal milas hadavar hanivchar kiyetz b'zeh. It's when something is chosen with no logical reasons at all. The whole thing transcends logic, and there's nothing special you could say about what is chosen. In other words, it's a mistake to say that Hashem chose Bnei Yisrael because they are X, Y, and Z. The only thing special about Bnei Yisrael is that Hashem chose us. Real bechira chavshis is that's what the one who's doing the choosing wanted.
Did she get muted for everyone or just me?
And when you understand this, then you understand that this is the idea of a girl. It's an idea of a lot. Because when you say, okay, we're going to decide this via lottery, you're saying some transcendent force is going to decide. You're not going to do, a whole analysis, a cost-benefit analysis, etc., etc. It's going to be decided by some transcendent factor. Ha'aisehu, the one who does the lottery, mashlich ez Yehovah ach v'rak al hagoyrel, he casts his reliance only on the lottery, mibli ladas ma yaleboy, without knowing what the lottery will decide. Ubelashen ha'kasuv, and like it says in Mishlei, v'cheik yuteles hagoyrel, in his lap will be thrown the lot, umehashem kol mishpatei, and the outcome is completely from Hashem. Al derech matana hatluya rak beratzon hanosein, and this is like a gift that is not precipitated by something that the person did, but is all about the desire of the giver. However, if you're feeling resistance in you, the Rebbe hears you. The Rebbe says, but yes, there's a difference between a gift and a sale, but there still is a similarity, and that is, even though the gift is initiated by the one who gives it rather than the person who comes to market with money and is looking to buy something, if that's true, but there's always still going to be a reason that somebody decides to give you a gift. Ukim Maimer. And like the Gemara says, Ilav de Avid le nafshe, if this person didn't give you some pleasure, if they hadn't given you something, lo yahiv le matanta, you wouldn't be giving them a present. Most people don't walk down the street and just, randomly give people presents. And in contradistinction to a gift, a lot has absolutely no connection to logic and reason. Okay, so the Rebbe has laid out the difference between sale and gift, and the difference between our relationship to Hashem through the avodah that we do, and the relationship that we have to Hashem that is inviolable and transcends what we do or we don't do, and has to do with the fact that Hashem chose us. Vav. But now we're going to go more deeply into understanding these different relationships. Inyan chalkeinu kasher loirak lavedasam shel Yisrael, elagam leetzem mitziusam. Okay, so above in Sif Hey, the Rebbe said that chalkeinu, our portion, has to do with our avodah. But now the Rebbe says we're going to drill down further, and we're going to uncover that there's a deeper level here, there's a deeper strata, and that is that chalkeinu, our portion, also has to do with our very existence. Ki nishmasei shel Yehudi nikras chelek Hashem amoy, because the soul of a Jew is referred to as Hashem's portion is his people. U'b'lashon HaTanya, and in the words of the Tanya, the nefesh hashenish b'Yisrael hi chelek Elokah mimal mamash. The second soul that is vested in a Jew is quite literally a part of God. V'yesh loymar shebe'inyan hagarel yesh yisrein gam al pnei maylo zu shebechalkeinu. And the Rebbe says, and that we're now going to say that second relationship encompassed or embodied in the term Geirel has an advantage over Chalkeinu, even on this deeper level that Chalkeinu refers not only and not even mainly to our Avodah, but to our very existence as Jews having a Nefesh Elokei. And what is that? What does the Geirel have? The fact that a Jew has a neshama, and the neshama is called Chelek Elokah Mimal Mamish, so this expresses the holiness and the advantage in the very existence of a Jew. And we might say, and we might say that that's why the Alter Rebbe kind of bolsters this idea of Chelek Elokah Mimal Mamash to the idea that Jews are called, connects these ideas to the idea that the Jews are called the children of Hashem. Banim atem l'Hashem Elokechem. Because this can be understood as in biological children and a biological father. The connection between a parent and a child is not contingent on what this child is going to do or not do. it's contingent on the existence of that bond, the fact that they are father and son, mother and child. V'nimtza. Shafilu inyan zeh shebechalkenu hu b'dugmas inyan hamecher haba mitzad halekeach. Okay, this is a little bit subtle, but the Rebbe is saying, so on this level, we might say that even this deepest level of chalkenu is still somewhat aligned with the idea of something that comes on the part of the one who came to buy something, on the one who came to acquire in the paradigm of mecher, in the paradigm of buying something. Why? Because it showcases virtues and characteristics. So when you come to buy something, let's say you're looking for a pot, that has a certain size, that has certain characteristics about it. Masha Einkein, this is going to become clearer when the Rebbe contrasts it, but a contradistinction be'inyan garalenu. When you're talking about lot, our lot, Bochar Banu, he chose us. Ha'ilui einoi b'mitziusei shel Yehudi. Because when Hashem chose us, this has nothing to do with anything about our existence. In other words, when you talk about the fact that there's a relationship between a parent and a child, you're still talking about a characteristic that you can identify. You can say, these two people are parent and child. But when you talk about Garalenu, it transcends that. Because as profound as the connection might be between parent and child, the connection of Chalkenu, but it's still limited. Why? I'm sorry. Harezu Maila Ukdusha Mukbelas. Mipnei Shehi Hakdusha Hakshura Limitziusai. It's limited because it is a holiness that is connected to that person's existence. So I am Jewish because my mother is Jewish. On that level, there's a limitation to the relation between me and Hashem, because it's based on the fact that I'm related to my mother. So you're talking about a limited property. But when you're talking about Garalenu, now you're talking about a bond that does not begin with my existence. It begins with Hashem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shalamayla Mikol Medida V'Hagbala. And Hashem transcends every and all limitation and parameters. V'yishloimar, we might say, Shazeu Kefel Lashon HaPasuk, that's why we have what seems to be a redundancy in a pasuk in Eschanan, where it says, Ki am kadosh ata laHashem, you are a holy nation to Hashem Elekecha. That's the first part of the pasuk. And then it says, Ubecha bachar Hashem, and Hashem chose you. Now, it seems like it's just saying the same thing in two ways. But again, we know that that's not the case. U'kameisha pirish Rashi, and Rashi right there tells us, Ki am kadosh ata, that when the Torah says you are a holy nation, kedushas atzmecha me'avoisecha. That is a holiness that you have intrinsically from your fathers. V'oid, and on top of that, u'b'cha bachar Hashem chose you. Am kadesh ata hi hakdusha mitzad ma'asher bana matam l'Hashem l'kechem. You are a holy nation. Where does this holiness come from? From the fact that you are children of Hashem. V'zuhi kedushas atzmecha, and this is a holiness that comes from within you. It's inherent to you. It's intrinsic to you. U'b'naisaf l'ka, and in addition to this, yesh inyan na'ala yoser, there is something that is higher, and that is ubecha bachar Hashem. Shebe b'Yisrael yeshna bechiras ha'atzmos. that the fact that we are Klal Yisrael, that we are Bnei Yisrael, this is a choice that comes from the innermost essence of Hashem. This is not about us, and it's not about our lineage. It's about something that's completely transcendent. And if you look very quickly at footnote 49, on the words that the Rebbe says, let's look back. 49. So that's attached to the word Zuhi Hiskashrus Haba Ach Virak Mitzad Habaycher. That this is a connection that comes only on the part of the one who chooses. And in the footnote it says V'yesh Loimar, we might say Shelachein Iker Inyan HaBechira Hu Beguf Shel Bnei Yisrael. And that's why we might say that the profundity of Hashem's choice of Bnei Yisrael expresses itself in the fact that the body of a Jew is different than a body of a non-Jew. But the body of the Jew, but the Alter Rebbe explains that the body resembles the bodies of non-Jews, and yet it is not. And yet the body is holy. So we're not talking about the soul. The soul we would understand. That's not such a wild idea, because it's a chelek al kamim al mamash. But the fact that the body is different, even though if you bring the body into the lab, it's going to be exactly like the body of anybody else, that showcases the profundity of the Bechira.
Yeah, but it seems that Gairel should go first.
Okay, so now we have thrashed out the difference between mecher and matana, between a sale and a gift, okay, which parallels the difference between chelek and goyrel. Ach afal pikein, notwithstanding the tremendous level of goyrel, gam matana, or gift, haba mitzad hanoisein, yesh la kesher ela makabel. But still in all, there's still the connection to the one who will receive. So even though a lottery is completely transcendent, but it's still connected to the ones who are in the lottery. Shechein, matana inyana shahanoisein moitzias hadavar mirshusoi v'noisnei biyad acher. Because what happens in the paradigm of gifting? The person who's giving the gift takes it out of his ownership and transmits it to somebody else, the makabel hamatana, the one that's receiving the gift. Bitnua shel hagasha v'iskarvus necha elazulas, and this is an overture of closeness, of moving closer to the one who is receiving the gift. Ukein zeh hu gam b'negel in a girl, and we see the same thing in a lottery. Even though the girl, the lottery, the paradigm of a lottery is not dependent on the qualitative aspects of what's being given over. But but at the end of the day, hareze inishal hakna. But it's still about acquisition. It's still about hashba, bequeathal. Yesh kan rotzain lekabel davar echad mitech kama ulehischalek imacherim. There is still this desire on the parties that are involved in this lottery to get something, to get one thing from among many, and in this way to be part of a distribution with others. So the person has still entered into the lottery. But exactly what they're going to get, yes, that is distributed based on some kind of transcendent process. But they're still there. They're very much there. Okay, they chose to buy a lottery ticket. Ach yesh inyan shlishi. But there is a third paradigm, Yerusha, inheritance. Shegidroi einoi nesina la'acher. Okay, this is the pivot. Okay, in a Yerusha, you're not talking about a category where there are two principles and something is passing from one to the other, whether it's via a sale or a gift. Ella shehayoresh oimed b'makom hamayrish, but rather the heir takes the place of the one they are inheriting from. Hayoresh einay mitzius acheres hamikabeles nechasim min hamayrish. The heir is not another existence that is receiving assets from the one that is being inherited. Ella kaloshon hakasuf, but as the pasuk says in Tehillim, tachas avoisecha yiyuvanecha. The heirs will take the place of the inheritor. In the place of your fathers will be your children. Hayoresh oimed b'makam hamayrish. The heir takes the place of the one who is being inherited. Hu etzem hamayrish ubederach memela yesh lebailos al nichse hamayrish, because he essentially becomes the one who is being inherited from. So therefore, the assets flow to him naturally. There's no acquisition, there's no gifting process. It is the inevitable result of being the heir. V'nimtza, shemaylas hayrush al pnei mecher matanahi. And so, what's the advantage of inheritance over sale or gift? Mecher umatana v'goyrel. So when you're talking about a sale or you're talking about a gift, which the Rebbe has compared to a lottery, hem inin shel nesina v'hashpa'a. In each one of these paradigms, there is something being given. There is bequeathal. Ein zeh adam k'moshehu la'atzmai, ela k'fi shehu mashpia la'acher shechutz heimenu. So what's happening is that one person is giving to another that is outside of them. V'achiluk meidehem eina ela mahi sibas hashpa. And the only difference between a sale and a gift is what's the difference that you would sell it to one person and you would give it to another. So you would sell your car to your neighbor and you'd give it to your child. B'mecher sibas hashpa hi halekeach demei hamecher hamecher shenasan. So it would seem that in a sale, the reason for the bequeathal is because there was a buyer, and the buyer has money. U'b'matana, and in a gift, it's ratzon hanosein. What fuels this transaction is the will of the one who is giving it. Aval gam ratzon hanosein teichnahu nesinas hadavar lezulas. But in either case, it's about giving to somebody else. Mashe einkein Yerusha, but in contradistinction, when you're talking about inheritance, eina hashpa lemishu shemichutz lemetzius hamayrish. Here, you're not talking about the transference of assets from one person to another. Hayoresh mikabelas hanechasim mipnei shehu oimed b'makom hamayrish. The heir receives these assets because they become the one from who they are inheriting. They actually take their place. And now in Seif Ches, the Rebbe is going to explain this in terms of our relationship with Hashem. And now we're in a position to understand the novelty and the additional depth in this last aspect, how beautiful is our inheritance as compared to the idea of Chelek and Goyrel. Chelkeinu hu hakesher shel Yisrael elokos kefi shakadosh baruch hu tzimtzem atzmai kavyachol. Chelkeinu is a relationship between Bnei Yisrael and God that is precipitated by Hashem contracting him herself, as it were, kavyachol, right? Kach she'avodasam shel Yisrael malasehem yitafsu makom etzloi. It's only on the level of tzimtzum that our work, that our service, that our overtures, that anything about us should even reckon by Hashem, should even mean anything. Yisera mizu, and more than this, lagabe kadosh baruch hu atzmai nemar, and about Hashem, it says in Koheles, gam ben va'ach ein loi. He has no son, he has no brother. Umashi Yisrael nikru b'shem banim harei zerak kefi shetzimtim hakadosh baruch hu atzmai kavyachol b'tayar av. So there are no relationships when it comes to atzmos. None at all. The fact that it says banim atem laHashem, that you are children of Hashem, this is already because of a tzimtzum where Hashem is mitzamtzim himself. Hashem contracts to, as it were, kavyachal, fit the paradigm of a father, and then there can be children. That's about chelkenu. Goyrelenu, bachar banu. We go to the goyrel, which is, again, parallel to the cell of the matana. Goyrelenu, bachar banu, bechira chavshis, hu hakesher shel Yisrael k'shabrichu mitzad hamadrega belukuzu b'Yisrael sheba mitzius mitzad atzma eina toifeses makom. V'hakesher hu rak mitzad bechirase chavshis shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. Here the Rebbe reviews, what does it mean, Goyrelenu? That this is a connection that is on the level of our existence, not on what we've contributed, but our existence, coexistence, because we're here. And the fact that what we do or what we don't do doesn't take up any place. The connection is not about us or our existence. It's all about Hashem having chosen us. Aval afal pikein gam bachar banu in yonei mashakadosh baruch hu bachar b'davar chutz himenu kavyachal. But even so, even this level of Hashem kavyachal choosing something that is other, where obviously there is nothing other than Hashem, ein oid milvadai, right? But as it were, we present as something other. Shechein geder bechira hu b'shayich l'davar shemichutz lebeicher, v'rak shasibas habechira eina mitzad mailas hadavar nifchar, ki mitzad rotzen habechira beicher. The Rebbe is saying, and it's true, that bechira still relates to something outside of yourself. That means there is something other. It's only that the reason for choosing it is not because of any characteristics of that thing, but it's because this is what the chooser chose. But there's still the other thing. Mashe ein kein Yerushasenu. And then you have the inyan of Yerusha. In Yonai she Yisrael him kavyachal mitzius achas im atzmusa yisbarach. Yerusha underscores, Yerusha highlights, Yerusha showcases that Bnei Yisrael are one thing with the atzmus of Hashem. Yisrael kuchabrichu hu kulachad. Bnei Yisrael and Hashem are one and the same. Hakesher shel Yisrael mekadosh baruch hu ba'atzmusa yizbarach shel lamayla mikol tnua eze shatia shel tzimtzum v'chulei. The connection between Bnei Yisrael and the atzmus of Hashem is higher than any type of overture. It's higher than the whole idea of tzimtzum. V'lachei nikra davar b'shem Yerusha. And that's why it's called inheritance. Shechein zeu geder ha'Yerusha. Shahayiresh oimed b'makam hamayrish b'yosei etzem hamayrish. Because what is the idea of inheriting? That the yiresh, that the heir, takes the place of the one from whom they inherited. That means that they are the core, they are the etzem of the one they are inheriting from. Tess. Shloishin yonim elu b'hiskashus Yisrael mekadosh baruch hu Chelkenu, Garelenu, V'Yerushasenu. These three aspects in our bond, in the bond between Bnei Yisrael and Hashem, Chelkenu, Garelenu, and Yerushasenu, Mischalkim Bechlalos, L'shloish Tkufos Klolius Ba'am Yisrael. Okay, we're now moving to the next set of cells on the metaphoric chart. And the Rebbe says that these three aspects of the bond were expressed in three eras in Jewish history. There's the era Aleph of Koidem Matan Torah, the time before the giving of the Torah. The second era is La'achar Matan Torah, the time after the giving of the Torah. Zman Avodas Yisrael B'kiyam HaTorah v'Mitzvos, the time where the Jews we keep the Torah, we do our mitzvahs. And then the third is La'asad Lavai, Zman Hagmul Ad Tachlis Shleima Shebazeh. And then there's the future, may it begin immediately, the time when we are repaid to the nth degree. We might say that the following is the explanation. Gam koidem Matan Torah nikru Yisrael b'shem banim. Even before Matan Torah, Bnei Yisrael were called the children of Hashem. K'may b'tiyas Mitzrayim b'ni b'chayr Yisrael, as it says in Shemais, my son, my firstborn Yisrael. So this was before Matan Torah. The gam koidem Matan Torah hisakayem is begolui milas Yisrael b'yachas l'chol umas ha'olam v'hi asher hivia l'tiyas Mitzrayim. And even before Matan Torah, there was already a manifest expression of how Jews have an advantage over the other nations, and this is the reason that brought Yetzias Mitzrayim. Akol ze haya maila b'mitzius v'ha'avoda shelahem. But this was all about what you could say was an advantage in who they are. Okay, it's like the famous sikh about why the Rebbe explains why Lech Lecha begins with Hashem's commandment to Avram, and not with all the great things that Avram Avinu accomplished before that. Because the Rebbe says his true greatness was not in what he accomplished on his own, but in that he heeded to the commandment of Hashem. So before Matan Torah, yes, there were things you could say about, they were called Banim Lamakim, the children of Hashem, and there were things you could say about Klal Yisrael that differentiated them and that even gave them an advantage over the other nations. But it was all about them. B'Matan Torah nizgala inyan ubanu bacharta mikol am v'lashain. But then, with Matan Torah, you get the idea of Hashem choosing us, B'chiras HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'am Yisrael, with all that was said above about the idea of Hashem choosing. That's got nothing to do with us. Olafichach, nitam bitur ledavra b'nesinas haTorah mitzvos liYisrael. And this was expressed through Hashem giving Torah and mitzvahs to Bnei Yisrael. Sharei zeh haya teichen hachidush sheb'Torah v'hamitzvos shenitnu b'Matan Torah b'yachas la'avodas Yisrael la'avos lefnei Matan Torah. Because in this is expressed the difference between before and after Matan Torah. Because lefnei Matan Torah ha'is avodas Yisrael miduda lefi koyach hanifra. Because, like the Gemara famously said, that they had all the information before Matan Torah. They even had all the details of how to make a Erev Chatzeres. But it was all measurable. There were metrics, and that was based on their strength. Ad heichon sheyad hanivra magas b'koychosev hapratim. How far a person can go with their own strength and their own characteristics. Masha Enkim b'Matan Torah, but when you compare and you contrast this with what happened at Matan Torah, Asher nasan lanu es Torah, Hashem gave him his Torah, anoichi, right? He put himself in the Torah. Hare b'Torah mitzvos nimtza koyach haboire. So now in the second era, you have the koyach of Hashem that is untrammeled, that has no limitations at all. And yet, there's a higher level. after the conclusion of the whole service of Torah mitzvahs, will be revealed the essential advantage, Mayafa Yerushasenu, Inyan Hanachala, the whole idea of inheritance. Masha b'nei Yisrael, Chad Heim Kavyachal Imatzmusa Yisbarach. That b'nei Yisrael are, as it were, Kavyachal, one with the essence of Hashem. Somebody's requesting that we do footnote 62. Ba'ar HaTorah l'Rav HaMagid, v'chein b'cheser Shem Tov, or Eiters, I don't know what that stands for, Mevor, shetzurasam shel Yisrael chakuka b'machshavta yisbarach, k'may shetzuras haben chakuka b'machshavas ha'av. So it's explained there that the form of Bnei Yisrael is engraved in the thought process of Hashem, like the form of a child is engraved in the thought process of a father. But the big difference is that when you're talking about a human parent, this whole idea that their child is engraved in their thought process is only possible after they become a parent, after they have a child. Masha ein kain, but in contradistinction, Eitzel Hashem Yisbarach, Shayach Zel Loimar Av Koidem Shenivru Yisrael Hayanechak Tzurasa B'Machshava. But regarding Bnei Yisrael, it's you can say it's shayach to say that the form of Bnei Yisrael, meaning the concept of Bnei Yisrael, was already engraved in Hashem's thought process before. Aval muvan, but it's understood she'ein zeh bechina de chelkenu ben ki bechinas machshava zu kodim shenifru Yisrael he bedaga shel lemayla mevchinas of. But again, this is not about the ben and the av, because this idea of kodim shenivru Yisrael, that even before Bnei Yisrael were created, we're already in Hashem's thought process, transcends the whole idea of av. Ki av perusha v'teichen Hashem sheyesh le ben. Because the content of saying you're a parent means you have a child. Masha ein kain, in contradistinction, bechinas hamachshava kodim shenivru Yisrael, he lamayla mevchinas of. But when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the idea that's explained in Chassidus, that Bnei Yisrael were already engraved before we were created, so that is higher than the whole idea of. Like the Rebbe says in the Pnim of the Sicha, that of is an inyan of tzimtzum. But here he's explaining that this is higher than of. But this is because Hashem chose us with his free choice. That this is the idea of Bachar Banu, this is the idea of Goyrel, and that's what Hashem chose. And therefore it can precede the existence. Yud. And now the Rebbe is going to circle back to the first question, which is, why is this the last mitzvah that the Rambam enumerates? Gorgiosity alert. V'yishloimar shezeu ha'abir b'siyum shisha sidrei mishnah. Now we could understand an explanation as to the very end of Mishnayos, but to understand it in a whole different way. And then we're going to connect it to how the Rambam finishes. Again, to cite what was cited earlier, Asir HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahanchil chulei, lahanchil oyhavei yesh. So before we understood the words lahanchil oyhavei yesh to mean that those who I love will inherit in abundant fashion. Harambam Mivara, but the Rebbe says, I'm going to give you a different explanation. The Rambam explains, Shaloshan Yesh, that this term Yesh, Meira al Mitzius Hatmidis Asher Ein La Tachlas, that this refers to, that this teaches about an existence that is eternal without any particular goal. To say it differently, a non-contingent existence. V'hainu. And of course, this means Atzmuso Yizbarach, Hashem. Hashem is the only eternal existence that has no goal, that has no reason, that serves nothing that precedes it, etc. This is called Yesh Ha'amiti, the true existence. Ulahanchil Oyeve Yesh Pirushoy. So what does it mean? Mashe Yehudi Nase Metzius Achas Kav Yochol Im Yesh Ha'amiti. What is the true inheritance of the Jew, of the one I love? That the Jew becomes Yesh, that the Jew becomes one and the same Kav Yochol with the Yesh Ha'amiti. V'zeu tam hadirk lahanchil oyave yesh. And that's why the term is lahanchil, to inherit, not to be given, not to be gifted. Because the unity or the fusion of the Jew with Hashem, the Yesh Ha'amiti, the Yesh Ha'muchlat, the only thing that exists with certainty, he mitzad inin hanachala. It's because of this idea of inheritance. Mashi Yisrael him kavyachal etzem hamayrish. Because we said that what's the idea of inheritance? That the heir is part of the atzmos of the one that they inherit. They're one and the same. Kavyachal. V'al pizeh yuvan atam lekach shebemitzvos nachalais hevi harambam dafkes hatevos ish kiyamus uben ein loy. And now, circling back to the second question that Rebbe asked at the beginning, now we understand why did the Rambam bring down these words from this pasuk, which at first glance doesn't seem to tell you anything about the mitzvah. It's kind of like just setting the context. And if a man will die and he has no sons, okay, like we would say today, tell me more. I'm curious, right? Like, what are you talking about? But now the Rebbe is saying, this is why the Rambam brings down these words. Uben ein loy, ki hatoichen haruchani shel inin anachla muva umizgala beinin uben ein loy dafka, because the whole spiritual depth of inheritance is expressed and is revealed in this idea. Uben ein loy, there is no son, there is no other. Inheritance is not about something passing from one person to another. There's no two people. Uben ein loy. There's no son, there's no brother, like the Rebbe brought down the pasuk earlier. Hamaleis chalkeinu v'garelenu shayachos l'madrega shabbat tzimtzum hakadosh baruch hu atzmai b'vchinas of hanoisenes makom l'mtzias noisefes ben. Because, as said earlier, in the paradigm of Chalkenu, Mecher, in the paradigm of Garelenu, of Matana, there's still Shayach. It's still possible for there to be two things, of and a ben. But that is contingent on Tzimtzum. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to be mitzamtzim himself. Umikach mishave mitziyazu. And then, as a result of this tzimtzum, there's a possibility for there to be two. And yes, there's a very, very close connection between a parent and a child, but there's still two. Afilu mitzad madregas garelenu bechiras hakadosh baruch hu b'Yisrael harei toichen inyan bechira hu shehu boicher behem sheyubanim. And even on the higher level of garelenu, even on the higher level of bechira and true bechira, which only belongs to Hashem, there's still two. There's still Hashem choosing another. I want you to be my children. Masha ein kein geda Yerushasenu. But in contradistinction, when you talk about Yerushasenu, inheritance, kashur ba'atzmusay shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You're talking about something that is derived from and is connected to the atzmus of Hashem. Val b'china zu nemar ubein ein loy. And on this level, there is no other. There's no brother, there's no child. Hulamaila mikol inyan. This is higher than anything. No matter how high, how deep, how close relationship might be, none of this exists. Nothing outside of Hashem exists. Even through the paradigm of choosing. Uba mushrashim b'nei Yisrael, and this is where we are. That's where we have our roots. We are rooted in this place called Atzmos, and that's why Yisrael u'kutshabrichu hu kul achad. B'nei Yisrael and Hashem are one and the same. That's our Sikha.